Let's test. So, whoa, whoa. That's the hottest microphone I've ever. I could talk from here. Can you help me out here? Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Testing, testing. There we go. That's a little bit better. Good. Have you, what? No, it's just me. Can you check online sound? Make sure we're good online. Well, good evening, everybody. It's good to see you. We are back in session, and we're back in the book of Esther. And I'm going to spread out here. There we go. We're good. And yes, I'm seated. Ugh. So while I was gone, I left with back problems and still have them. I brought them back with me, Warren. And yeah, I didn't want to leave them somewhere else. So I wanted to bring them back home. And went and found a chiropractor while I was gone who, before, I told this story on Tuesday, before he even laid a hand on me, he asked me to do 3 things, and without even touching me, and he said, oh, you have a bulging disc in your lowest vertebrae. Like, without even touching me, he'd do these things, and he's like, that's what it is. So he actually, I had enough time to see him twice, but just got referred to somebody here in town, but it's not until Monday morning. So I'm going to be the little engine that maybe, I'm not going to say could, but maybe through the weekend. So here we are, and we're all good. And no, I do not have COVID. So there you go. Yeah, right. I'm just telling you. Here's the thing. I get on a plane, and I think to myself 2 things. One is I'm on my way to be off work for a while. I do not want to be sick when I arrive in my time off. So I wear a mask on the plane, which Rachel and I are the only 2 people on a plane wearing masks. But I'm wearing a mask because I don't want to get there and then be sick and be miserable beyond what's going on back here. So I did that, so I'm good. And then I wore it on the way back because I also knew that once I get back into town, I'm right back here. So it's like I got to be healthy. So I took care of myself to make sure that I would not be sick when I got back. So at least, not kind of, right? Other than what my head tells me. So with that, first of all, we want to welcome our folks online who are tuning in tonight. We're glad that you are with us. It is the kickoff for our elementary age program again, has started up. So we have some elementary age kids here. We have our high school group here. We have this group here. And I love the fact that we have a bunch of folks in the building midweek. And we started that last year, and it has gone well. And now the fall has kicked back in. So it's great to have the kids back. So we're going to open with prayer. And then we're going to pick up in chapter 4 where we left off, and I'll give a background to what we were doing so that you know where we're at. So let's pray. Gracious God, we gather together tonight, and we give thanks for the food and those who serve the food. We give you thanks for the noise of the children, which tells us that our church is alive and active. We ask for prayers tonight for the families that were affected by the school shooting in Georgia. And we ask for comfort, and we ask for your presence in their lives that are just devastated and asking questions like, why? And so our hearts go out to those folks tonight, Lord, and we just ask that you be with them and surround them with the love and support that they need in this moment. We also ask, as we start to dig into your word, that you actually enliven our hearts and our minds to remember some of the things that we are hearing and to think about and meditate on after this time together. And so we pray this and all things in Jesus' name. And together we say, amen. So one of the things that came to me at the end of Bible study last time, which was just 2 weeks ago, Mark came to me with a question. See, I didn't forget. I actually, mine like a sieve, just like that. And I remembered because Mark is working from a different translation of the Bible that refers to Xerxes as Ahasuerus, different name. And the question was, why, when you are reading, are using the king's name Xerxes, and why does my translation have Ahasuerus? So I got to the bottom of this. That Ahasuerus is actually the Hebrew version of that king's name. So in some ways you're the OG, the original. You got the old school name there. What scholars did, either rightly or wrongly did, was they looked at history and pointed to the most likely Persian king that would correlate to Ahasuerus' name, which was, they chose, at least in the NIV, Xerxes, which is Persian in spelling and pronunciation, but also the other, because I started going down a rabbit hole on this thing, that it also could have been, or speculated, Artaxerxes versus just Xerxes. So two different kings. But that's why is they equated it and made the editorial decision to use a Persian name that equated to that time period. So that's what I know. How about that? Yeah, good. I just didn't want you staring at me all night with the angry eyes. So just had to get that off my chest. I feel better now. A little bit of confession. So when we left off in chapter 4, we're going to pick up in verse 12, but where we left off in chapter 4 is the plot is discovered that Haman, who is the king's number 2 guy, who has personal grievance against the Hebrew people, convinced the king Xerxes or Ahasuerus, to commit genocide later in the year, and did that by casting the lot or the pure for a certain date or whatever the random date comes up. So Esther, who is the queen, her cousin, who's more like an uncle to her, discovers this, hears about it, and he goes into mourning. He's wearing sackcloth. He's got ashes on. Esther hears about this because she's living in the palace. He can't come in wearing sackcloth. And she sends her person to go find out why he's in mourning. And maybe it's because he just needs new clothes. She sends new clothes. She's like, it's not that. There's a plan to commit genocide. And Mordecai sends a note back saying, you're the queen. You got to do something. And she's like, yeah, but I don't have the clout you think I have. It's not like we're ruling side by side here. She's like, first of all, I can only go see the king if I'm invited. And 2, I haven't seen him in 30 days. I don't even know if the guy likes me anymore. I live in a different part of the palace, so on and so forth. So that's where we left off. And so she sends that note back to Mordecai. I don't even know where I stand with him. If I just walk into the throne room, he's got a standing order that unless you're invited in and he points the golden scepter at you, he could just kill you. Like, that's the rule. So I just can't go in and say, hey, honey, I got a favor, right? Like, that's not how it works. So she reports this through her servant back to Mordecai at the gates wearing sackcloth and ashes. And so that's what happens. We're going to pick it up in verse 12 is where we left off. So I want to read that to you. Verse 12, chapter 4, 12 to 14. So when Esther's words were reported back to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And then he adds this, which is really the centerpiece of this story. It's probably what I'd consider the most well-known phrase in the entire book of Esther. And he says, and who knows but that you have come to a royal position for such a time as this. So, first of all, he has great faith. He's like, if you don't want to do anything, you don't have to. He said, God will provide. He said, we may not survive this, but he's kind of thinking bigger picture. He's like, but I'm pretty sure God's chosen people will survive. That help will come from another place, but you and me and people in town and other parts of the provinces will not survive. But then he adds in, but maybe you became queen for this very reason. And you go, because we talked about last time, is that God is not even mentioned in this book, directly. But what this is a deep speculation on Mordecai to say, without saying it, maybe God arranged for you to become queen for this very trouble that we're facing, our very own annihilation. This is your moment to shine. And he relays that. And I think that's pretty interesting to say, maybe you were called to this moment. And, and you think to yourself, in this thing, you go, there are lots of times in your life where you come to a problem and you think, I don't want this problem in my lap. But maybe God has brought me to it to address it. And if you've never had to be in that position, I consider you very blessed. But there are times that you are called to something and you don't want it, you don't ask for it, but maybe you're the person to bring resolution to it. And maybe that's what Esther needed to hear, that this is your time to do something. Because, a lot of people are like, well, that's not my job. That somebody else needs to take care of that. I'm not doing that. But sometimes maybe we're called into that fray to be that person, to do that thing. So this is what Esther does. Verse 15. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. She said to him, go gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days or nights, and I and my maids will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it's against the law. In other words, even if this might cost me my life, and if I perish, I perish. So she gets kind of this idea to do something. And it's not clear if whether she knows the whole extent of what she's going to do, but she's got a pre-plan. And she tells everybody, she's like, we got to get ready for this. We spiritually prepare ourselves by fasting. And fasting in this case is for deliverance, for safety. And this also fasting is a humbling, that you are fully relying on God. Now, here's that subtle text though, right? God's not mentioned in the book, but God is certainly a part of this story. And fasting in this way, because if nobody believed in God in this story, there's no reason you'd be fasting. I mean, unless you wanted to lose some weight, right? I mean, there's no reason to fast. You are fasting for a very specific outcome directed at someone very specific, God. So it's clear there are people of faith when, she's like, you guys got to fast for me. And after that, then I'll go. And 3, by the way, biblically speaking, 3 is a godly number. And so we're not into numerology. per se, but in those times, scripturally, they were. And so 3 days, perfection, completeness. 3 and 7 are the really biblical, godly numbers. And so 3 days directed towards God, and she's resigned to whatever may happen. She's like, we're going to prepare, we're going to fast, probably pray, and then whatever happens after that, she's definitely singing the song, Que sera, sera. Whatever will be, will be. And so Mordecai goes and tells everybody. Esther and her maids, they go, and they fast, they prepare, and that's how we begin chapter 5. So on the third day, so all the fasting, she put on her royal robes, stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall, and the king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall facing the entrance. When he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her, and he held out to her the golden scepter that was in his hand. So she approached and touched the tip of the scepter. So she gets ready. She dresses up. She wants to see the king. She wants to put on her best face for him. And she's kind of standing kind of out, kind of in, not quite in the hallway, but far enough out that he can see her, but she's not approaching. And she takes the risk, and he was happy to see her. So he holds out the scepter, right? So she can approach. Because had he not done that, the story ends here. Right? You are not welcome here. You have not been invited. Go put her to death. The end. So he welcomes her. In verse 3, he says, what is it, Queen Esther? What is it you request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be given to you. He's happy to see her. And that's a generous offer. I mean, at this point, you're like, a new Cadillac would be nice, First class tickets to Jerusalem, But he makes an offer to her because he's happy to see her. And she says this, which is not what we would expect. If it pleases the king, Esther replied, let the king together with Haman, the guy who planned the genocide, come to a banquet that I have prepared for him. So this is the first step in this plan. She doesn't just say, okay, someone's trying to kill all my people, and by the way, I didn't tell you I'm Jewish, because remember, this is a big secret, my name is not Esther, it's actually Hadassah, surprise, you're like, none of that. She's easing into this. She's thinking this through. She's like, I want you and Haman to come to dinner. And she doesn't deviate, right? I mean, at that point, when you get the audible, right, the change in call, where it is, you can have half the kingdom, what do you want? All of a sudden, you're like, yeah, well, forget dinner. We could do something better. But she doesn't deviate, which says something about her integrity, and she makes this simple request, not a hard one. So she sets the stage for the ask. So in other words, she just doesn't jump right to it. So in verse 5, King says, bring Haman at once so that we may do what Esther asked. So the king and Haman went to the banquet Esther had prepared. And while they were drinking wine, the king asked again, Esther, now what is your petition? It will be given to you. And what is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, and it will be granted. So the second time, Xerxes like, okay, we're drinking some wine, we're relaxing, I'm feeling good, whatever you want, up to half the kingdom, I'll give it to you. There are some limits, but up to half I'm willing to do. And she doesn't ask to rescind the genocide yet. Listen to this, verse 5. Esther replied, my petition and my request is this. If the king regards me with favor And if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet I'll prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question. So there's a couple of things going on here. You're like, is she playing hard to get? Is she hedging her bets? What, did she like almost do it and then got scared and said, oh, I just want to have another dinner party? Some way she's building anticipation, but at the same time having a real casual demeanor about it. I know you're offering half the kingdom, but all I really want is for you to come to dinner. This is so nice. Let's do this again. But some scholars have suggested this, that she, after fasting for 3 days, and her maids, Mordecai, and all the Jewish folks in Susa, in that town that could fast for 3 days, that she was waiting for a sign from God before making the request. Like she was waiting for something for God to kind of say, okay, now's the time. The sign hasn't come. So she's waiting on God for some sort of sign to show it's the right time to ask. And within all this, she's also ingratiating herself with her husband, the king, right? Because they hadn't seen each other in 30 days. He says yes to the dinner party. They're having nice. I'm drawing him in. Come to another dinner party if that's okay. So a number of things floating around on why she didn't ask in this moment. She's waiting for the right moment that God is giving his assent to. I don't know about you, but sometimes waiting is hard. Sometimes I just want to jump the gun, right? Shoot and ask questions later, all of that. Just get to the heart of this. But there's discernment in waiting for the right moment. So she's waiting for the right moment. So verse 9, Haman, the guy who wants to commit genocide, went out happy and in high spirits. But when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate and observed that he neither rose, showed fear in his presence, he was filled with rage against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. Party ends. It was a great night. Not very many people get to eat with the king and the queen of Persia, the empire. Like, he's one of a few select people, maybe the only one. And this is about as good as it gets. Like, I am in the king's presence. I get invited over for dinner. But then I see Mordecai on the way out, and he doesn't bow to me. He doesn't show deference to me. And now he's angry. Says something about Haman's mental stability. Best day of my life, worst day of my life, same day. Like I'm riding high, now I'm mad, what? He's so mad about this that when he gets home, he gathers people because he has to talk about it. Can you imagine being so upset? They're like, I'm going to call people and tell people how mad I am. That's what he does. Verse 10. Calling together his friends and Zeresh, his wife, Haman boasted to them about his vast wealth, his many sons, and all the way the kings had honored him and elevated him above all the other nobles and officials. So first of all, he's like, look at me, I'm so great. Look how wealthy I am. Look at my family, I'm so great. I'm wealthy, blah, 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 blah. And he's like, I'm better than everybody else, me, 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 me. And then he said, that's not all. I'm the only person Queen Esther invited to accompany to the king to the banquet she gave. And she invited me along with the king tomorrow. It's like, this is the best 2 days of my life. But this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate. Life is great and it stinks at the same time. You ever known somebody like that? Where like the good things could be happening, but all they can focus in on is the one bad thing. Like, life in every other measure, everybody be willing to have your life, but all you can focus in on is that one bad thing that's not going your way. Kind of gets tiring after a while. So his life is going good, but he can't stand Mordecai. He's focused on the one thing that's inconsequential. He can't let it go. You know, violins are playing. Your life is so rough. So his wife tries to cheer him up. His wife, this is verse 14, wife Zeresh, and all of his friends said to him, you know, maybe you'd feel better if you'd have some gallows built. Right? Just, you know, maybe you need to go do some woodworking, right? You know, that'll take your mind. You need a little project. Have a gallows built. Like, but this isn't just any gallows. You really need to work those out. It needs to be like 75 feet high. And then, once you've done that, you know, get all your frustration out building this thing. Ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai hung on it. Then go to the king, then go with the king to the dinner and be happy. I love this. She's like a problem solver, right? What a helpful wife. In my house, if either of us are frustrated about something, the question that is asked before we move on to anything else, the question is this: do you want me to listen, or do you want me to problem solve? Because sometimes the other person, all they want to do is, I just want somebody that'll listen to me and sympathize with me. Sometimes they're like, no, I'm trying to figure this thing out and problem solve. Well, she just jumps right into the problem solving thing, right? Because if you jump to problem solving when all they wanted was a sympathetic ear, you're actually digging yourself a hole. I'm just telling you. This is my helpful hints for good relationships. Ask the question. You want me to be a problem solver, or you want me to listen? Well, she was like in the problem solving. She's like, you need to work this out. Build a gallows. Stay up all night. 75 feet tall. You'll get all that frustration out. He loves it. He delights in it. He thinks that's a great idea. So he builds it. And that's the other part. Like, is he building this thing in his backyard? Like, really? Seriously, it's at his house. It's like, I guess they didn't have permitting back then. Definitely did not have an HOA, right? They'd be writing you up, yeah, sorry, you cannot put a gallows in your backyard. I can't even put a hummingbird feeder in a certain spot on my patio without getting written up, let alone a 75-foot gallows. So he does that, chapter 6. That night, the king could not sleep. So he gets done with the good dinner. He's having some insomnia. So he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. It was found recorded there that Mordecai had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, who conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. We covered this early on in the book. It's like chapter 2 or 3. Mordecai discovers a plot to kill the king. He tells Esther. Esther tells the king. Saves the king's life. So this is actually recorded in the book of Esther. But I love the fact that the king, and we know that, A, he likes to drink too much. He's rash. You know, he's all over the map. My wife won't come see me. I'm going to banish her forever. You know, then he regrets it. Like, this guy's all over the map. But get this. This like completes the picture of King Xerxes. I can't sleep. Someone come read me a bedtime story about me. Right? Like, that's what, it's like the record of my reign. Would you come just read me a story of all the great things I've done in life? Okay. Sure. So they get to the part about Mordecai unveiling the plot to kill him. So in verse 3, Xerxes asks the question. He says, what honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this? Nothing has been done for him, his attendants answered. So, first of all, the guy's so all over the map that a guy saves his life and he forgets to recognize and thank the guy. I'm here, I'm there, I'm a little bit everywhere, I'm a little scatterbrained. And he's like, so did we do something for this guy? Did we send him one of them fruit bouquets? Right? Did we, do one of those, those gift cards to like Bass Pro Shops? Do we? No, nothing. So he's like, okay, so at least at this moment, he's like, we got to do something for this guy, Mordecai. And at this point, it's not clear that he knows that is Esther's cousin. I don't think that's in the know yet. So he's like, I got to do something. So he gets up. He's like, I got to find an advisor. Let me know. What do you think I should do? So verse 4. The king said, who's in the court? Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the palace to speak to the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows. I'm telling you, this would be a great sitcom, right? Like, I'd watch this. So Haman just showed up. He got his gallows built and he had erected for him. So his attendants answered, well, Haman's here. So bring him in, the king ordered. And when Haman entered, the king asked him, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Now Haman thinks to himself, it's right here in Scripture, who is there that the king would rather honor but me? Right? He's like, the king's being a little coy, of course. He doesn't name me, but I know he's talking about me. So all of a sudden, the king asks Haman a question, and he thinks it's a hypothetical to some degree because he doesn't name him. He's like, I'm clearly his favorite. So I'm going to dream up and give the most elaborate answer for how you would honor somebody if you were the king. Verse 7. So he answered the king, for the man who the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe for the king, the one that even the king has worn, and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on its head. Then let the robe and the horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor, lead him on a horse through the streets, proclaiming before him, the servant, this is what's done for the man who the king delights to honor. So Haman's thinking, he's dreaming this. He's like, in the next 20 minutes, I could be on this horse with a robe and a servant saying, the king likes this guy. I want everybody to know it. He loves this. He's eating up. Like, he's just dreaming this daydream of how great this is going to be. And then, pop, the bubble bursts. Verse 10. Go at once, the king commanded Haman. Get the robe and the horse and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew. What? And you can find him. He's sitting at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have recommended. So Haman got the robe and the horse, and he robed Mordecai and led him on horseback through the streets, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. Oof, gut punch for Haman. Loving this. Surprise. And as well, it's a lesson in keeping your ego in check, right? When you let your ego go run wild, what happens is this will come back to bite you. It came back to bite you. And, if you were going to talk about biblical advice in this moment about keeping your ego in check, Philippians chapter 2. Yeah, New Testament, but listen to this. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Each of you should not look to your own interests, only to your own interests, but also the interests of others. Philippians chapter 2, verse 3 and 4. Everything in that verse in Philippians 2 is the exact opposite of what Haman's been up to. Like, it's about me. I want the king to honor me. I'm better than everybody else. I'm only looking out for me, numero uno. And even for him, the king is just a pawn in Haman's game in a lot of ways. So keep your ego in check. Philippians chapter 2. Don't be like Haman. I'm going to get that on a t-shirt. Don't be like Haman. Okay, water break. So after that, after the great parade, verse 12, afterwards Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief. And he told Zeresh, his wife, and all of his friends everything that had happened to him. His advisors and his wife Zeresh said to him, since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him, and you will surely come to ruin. So, like, just the night before, go build a gallows, you know. You know, everything's going to be great. The king loves you. The queen loves you. You know. Then they come back and they're like, yeah, your life stinks. It's over. It's time to give up. But what I loved, he's crushed. He's thin-skinned. Like, oh, my gosh. And within this, though, is this inspiration. Here's what I don't want you to miss, is the story within itself. This is a moment of hope. If you were a person of faith and you're feeling oppressed and life's not been going well and you're reading the story for a little bit of hope, and what do you hear coming out of the mouth of Zeresh, a Gentile woman, a pagan woman? The Jewish people are going to win. That's it. Jewish people are going to win. It's as if it was common knowledge. I mean, of course, it's written by Jewish people of faith, but it's as if it's being spoken in such a way where it's like, well, everybody knows they're God's chosen people. And I know earlier we said your life is great, but ultimately, God's chosen people are going to win in this. And what you want, remember when we go back and we're at that point where the king says to Esther at the dinner party, so number 2 times, he says, what do you want? And she balks. And she says, come back for dinner tomorrow night. Under this thought is she was waiting for a sign. Here's your sign. She got the subtle nod from God in the honoring of Mordecai. This is the moment. So she wasn't sure what God was up to. She wanted to wait until God, gave that sign without saying, look to the clouds and it's written, here's your moment. But the sign of Mordecai being lifted up and honored, okay, there's the moment I've been waiting for that subtle note from God to say, now you can proceed. It could have been anything, but in the story, here's the sign that she's been. It doesn't say that. I'm just telling you. Here's this where the story turns, and she obviously senses now is the moment to ask. So chapter 6, verse 14, while they were still talking with him, that is Haman, his wife, his friends, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried Haman away to the banquet Esther had prepared. So here's the moment of truth. Chapter 7. So the king and Haman went to dine with Queen Esther, and as they were drinking wine on that second day, again the king asked Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given to you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted. Are you keeping count? Third time. Remember what I said about 3? Godly number of perfection, completeness. So it's kind of wrapped in there for us. If we were folks, we'd be like, oh, this is the moment. This is a godly number. So it's the moment of truth. She's got the sign. She's received it. The king really means his words. How do you know that? Because he's asked a third time, so he really means it. It's now or never. What's behind door number 1? No, I'm kidding. Will you trade that? Let's make a deal, right? Verse 3, chapter 7. The queen answered, if I have found favor with you, O king, and if it pleases your majesty, grant me my life, and this is my petition, and spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold for destruction and slaughter and annihilation. If we'd been merely sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet. but because no such distress would justify disturbing the king. So she lays it out. She's like, me and my people, we're going to be killed. Question is, will you help me? She even saw, I love the fact that Esther is so suave. She's like, look, if it was just slavery, I wouldn't even say anything. I just keep my mouth shut. That's not a big deal, right? She like softens the argument of saying, look, if it was something short of, just genocide, I just wouldn't have bugged you. I'd have been, I'd just been fine. But she does this to really strengthen what she is requesting. Verse 5, King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, who is he and where is the man who dare to do such a thing? I told you he was not the sharpest stick in the bunch of sticks here, right? Like, I don't know, King Xerxes, how many edicts of genocide have you signed in the last month, buddy? Right? I think there's just one that I'm aware of. Who's doing this? I don't know. Who's going to plot to kill a whole race of people? Like, what? So she lets him have it. Verse 6 and 7. Esther said, the adversary and the enemy is the vile Haman. Then Haman was terrified because he's sitting there at dinner. Like, he's watching them talk. Can't you feel the soap opera feel of this story? Like this is the moment they're eating dinner and he's like, it's just over small talk and a glass of wine. What do you want? Well, someone's going to kill all my people and me. But if it was just slavery, I wouldn't say anything. And he's like, what? I don't know about this. And who would do such a thing? And she does the slow sweep with the pointing. That vile Haman. Like right there at the dinner table. Like, yikes. Very soap opera-esque. So the king got up in a rage, left his wine. That's how mad he is. Remember how much he likes drinks? Chapter 1, the dude had an open bar for half a year, right? He's so upset he left his wine. Notice they make a note of that. The dude liked his drink. And he went out into the palace garden. But Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, decided to stay behind and beg Queen Esther for his life. Man, you can just feel this moment, right? She points to Haman. It's him. He's in big trouble. The best I can do is appeal to her. The king storms out. But wait, it gets better, right? There's more. It gets better. Verse 8, just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. Yeah, right? The king exclaimed, will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house? And as soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. So, Haman is distraught, I don't know, and then he kind of trips and he falls onto the couch. The minute that the king comes back in, looks like he's about to assault her, and even though he was going over to beg for the life, and he's his life, and he's like, and the king sees this, misinterprets it, and the guards come in, and essentially, they put the black bag over his head, right? Like, we're done. Verse 9. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs attending the king, said, a gallows of 75 feet stands over at Haman's house. Like, what a coincidence. You just put the black bag on his head to hang him, and that just so happens he just built a gallows. You can see it from everywhere in the city. Why? Because it's 75 feet tall. It was made for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king. And the king said, hang him on it. So, it kind of is the arc of justice bends in the right direction here. And just deserts of being hung on the gallows you built for someone who didn't just bow to you, I mean, it was a personal grudge based in that long history between the Amalekites and the Israelites. And so he points out, he's like, well, you got already built gallows. So essentially they took him back to his own house and hung him on the gallows. And then it says this, so they hanged Haman on the gallows, and he prepared for Mordecai, and the king's fury subsided. So you would think in this moment, things are looking pretty good, and they are, but we're not at the end of the story yet. You feel like this could be, and they lived happily ever after, but there's a little bit more, so we're going to keep going, chapter 8. So that same day, the king Xerxes gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. So now it's not just he's gone, but like all that land, well, it belongs to Esther now. And Mordecai came into the presence of the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her. So now it's like, oh, there's the connection. The king took off his signet ring, which he had reclaimed from Haman, presented it to Mordecai, and Esther appointed him over Haman's estate. So now, really, the just deserts of Haman's life is now owned by Queen Esther, and the man that Haman hated is now the overseer of this estate, whether you call it reparations or whatever you want to call it. And the signet ring, which I didn't talk about last time, but the signet ring is the ring that you could stamp, and because it's the king's signet ring, and Haman had it for a while, essentially, whoever has the signet ring could actually write up orders or directions and use the king's name as he saw fit. So in a lot of ways, Haman, but now Mordecai, was the number 2 guy in all of Persia. He's the prime minister. In the same way that, if you remember, we were doing a sermon series a while ago on Joseph, of who was in Egypt, and he went from being in prison all the way up to being the second guy in command. Well, that same kind of thing. But here in Persia, now Mordecai, who is Jewish, is now the number 2 guy in all of Persia. And so he has the signet ring. So here we go. Verse 3. Esther again pleaded with the king, falling at his feet and weeping. She begged him to put an end to the evil plan of Haman, the Agagite, which he had devised against the Jews. The king extended his gold scepter to Esther, and she arose and stood before him. So we're not done with the business of rescinding the genocide yet. So she realizes there's still stuff to be done. She realizes that the threat of annihilation is not over. She's crying. She's at his feet. She's begging. And the rules of monarchy still apply here. And they have to undo the edict, but she also isn't allowed to beg and plead unless the king allows it, even though she's kind of started. But he points the scepter at her to say, no, it's okay, tell me everything. And so she is breaking protocol, but he really is showing his care for her in this moment, and he allows her because of her passion and her emotions in this. And so the king extends the scepter to essentially give permission to hear Esther's voice. Verse 5. If it pleases the king, she said, and if he regards me with favor and thinks it's the right thing to do, and if he's pleased with me, let an order be written overruling the dispatches that Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, devised and wrote to destroy all the Jews in all the king's provinces. So for how can I bear to see disaster fall on my people, and how can I bear to see the destruction of my family? So obviously it's just the next step, right? Like Haman's gone, the queen is safe, Mordecai is safe, but everybody else of Jewish descent, they're not yet. So she's like, we have to fix this. And in verse 7, King Xerxes replied, to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, because he's there, because Haman attacked the Jews, I have given his estate to Esther, and they have hanged him on the gallows. Now write another decree in the king's name on behalf of the Jews as seems best to you. Seal it with the king's signet ring, for no document written in the king's name and sealed with the ring can be revoked. So here we go. The king gives Mordecai and Esther full reign to write whatever they want in this edict. I mean, think about this. He's not like, okay, write me something and I'll sign it. He's like, that's up to you guys. Whatever you want to put in there, you can put it in there. And your first act, Mordecai, as prime minister, is to rescind the edict and stamp it with the signet ring. And so that's exactly what happens. And verses 9 and 10, which I'm not going to read, describe the process of writing and delivering the message. So we're going to pick it up down at verse 11. The king's edict granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and to protect themselves, to destroy, kill, and annihilate any armed force of any nationality or province that might attack them, their women and children, and to plunder the property of their enemies. The day appointed for the Jews to do this in all the provinces of King Xerxes was the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. So the very day that genocide was supposed to happen for everybody of Jewish descent, it has been flipped. We flipped the script now. And it says a copy of the text of the edict was to be issued as law in every province and made known to the people of every nationality, so that the Jews would be ready on that day to avenge themselves of their enemies. So they went from being on the defensive, if not in hiding or trying to get out of town, to now they are on the offensive. The shoe is on the other hand now, right? Did you hear that? Okay. So it's time to avenge the miscarriage of justice perpetrated by Haman. And verse 15 says this. Mordecai left the king's presence wearing royal garments of blue and white, a large crown of gold, and a purple robe of fine linen. And the city of Susa held a joyous celebration. For the Jews, it was a time of happiness and joy, gladness and honor. And in every province, in every city, wherever the edict of the king went, there was joy and gladness among the Jews, feasting and celebrating. And many people of other nationalities became Jews because fear of the Jews had seized them. So a couple of things happening. We see that Mordecai not only has the title, but now even is bestowed the honor of wearing the finest robes possible, because the dye for purple and the dye for blue were extremely rare and a very arduous process back then. So only the richest of folks could have purple and blue robes, and even having things of white or bleached white was very hard to find. So he's wearing the finest robes, he's wearing a crown, and the news gets out, there is celebrating, there is feasting, and then all of a sudden, beyond the party atmosphere, there are folks who convert to Judaism out of fear. Right? Yeah, I want to be Jewish too. Please don't hurt me. Right? I love that. Yes, Stan. So I think you got a couple of things going on here. That very much so, the truth of Jewishness resides not only in faith but ethnicity. That's the truth. At the same time, for a large portion of history, there isn't a process for converts. There is today, but you either are or you aren't, right? For a large portion of history. a part of this story is more about giving hope to specifically Jewish folks under oppression. That was the major theme, more than is it following ceremonial law. So in this case, the theme of the story of giving hope is way more important to the tellers of this story and the authors of the story than does it tick all the 613 laws of Leviticus and Deuteronomy. So the choice of the author was, let's tell a story that brings hope, brings laughter, and brings joy in the midst of hardship. So it was an author's choice. No, this is it. This is it. You will not see it moving forward either. So, yes, sir. Say that again? Yeah, Ruth converted, but not mentioned like this, where it's, yes, Ruth marries, Boaz, and it's left unsaid, right, Mark? I mean, it's like she marries Boaz, they have kids. She's great-great-grandma to King David, right? Like the end of the story. But yeah, I mean, clearly, when she says to Naomi, your God will be my God, where you die, I will die, so on and so forth. But those are the exceptions in the Old Testament or in the Hebrew Bible versus the rule, right? Yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah, right? Right? Yeah, right? I mean, I think it's always possible. Yeah, like St. Patrick's Day or Cinco de Mayo, right? Yeah, right? Yeah. Yes. And other minor. Okay, so let's dissect this. We're going back to Ezra and Nehemiah, and this, although written in the same time period, and really have shared some of the same themes, if not authorship, not universally, but just overall, what you're dealing with between Ezra and Nehemiah and Esther are, you have to make the delineation that they're two different stories, even if it had the same authorship. And Ezra and Nehemiah were rebuilding the nation of Israel in Jerusalem and the province. They were ultimately concerned with rebuilding that nation, not just a nation of people, but a nation on that land given to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. So they're very concerned with what caused them to lose the land, to lose their autonomy. And it had everything to do with the fact that they had stopped following God, specifically as it related to the law. So Ezra comes back and says, if you want this kingdom to stand that is led by God, we got to get back to following God the way it's prescribed in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. And a part of that, which they fixated on in Ezra and Nehemiah, but really, I mean, almost overabundantly, was the whole idea of the mixed heritage marriages. Like, we spent a lot of time on that because it keeps coming up. So the story of Ezra and Nehemiah is all about reestablishing the temple, Jerusalem, and following ceremonial and religious law, the Ten Commandments and the other, 603, so that the kingdom of Israel would be reestablished and be permanent. Esther stands apart from that, being in Persia and not in Israel. So what you could look at is to say, we got to look at these stories, even if they're from the same time period and even have some shared authorship, we got to look at them from two different points of view. And that the whole point of Esther in this whole scheme of things is that God's people get saved even when they're under oppression, that God is faithful, and that God can use regular people like Esther to make a difference. And you have to kind of remove yourself from the ceremonial part of the law just to be in the story. How does that strike you? What was it? I missed that. What? Okay. We're at time now. Is there anything else? Okay. We're going to pick up in chapter 9 in 2 weeks, and we will finish the book and move into Job next time. So with that, let's pray. Gracious God, we give you thanks this evening for gathering us together to hear your word, to eat some dinner, spend some time together in fellowship, all things that warm your heart. And so may some of these ideas, thoughts in this story kind of bounce around in our hearts and minds during the week until we gather for worship this weekend. But we entrust this night to you, praying in Jesus' name. And together we say, amen. Have a good night, everybody.